Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. Assalatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We thank Allah profusely for His infinite blessings on us, worldly wise and spiritually. Tawfiq is from Allah. And so we have to thank Him for all His tawfiq also, not only for His blessing. Tawfiq is also a blessing, that He has given us the tawfiq to attend a halaqah devoted to Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and those who follow Allah. We have been talking about the Umayyad dynasty actually, in one sweeping session I completed on the Umayyad dynasty, the highlights of the Umayyad dynasty, and then I thought of talking about Umar bin Abdul Aziz, the 8th of the Umayyad Khalifas. And in 2 sessions, I finished about him. It took me 2 sessions. One session on the whole dynasty, and 2 sessions on just Umar bin Abdul Aziz, rahmatul alayhi, and 2 sessions. And then I had some reflections on him. So that took 1 session. And then I thought I should tell some stories about his life, some amazing stories. And these stories are collected for the most part by Imam Suyuti, a very renowned Islamic scholar of the 9th century of the Hijra calendar, or between or in the 15th century of the Gregorian calendar. And he's known as a Mujaddid. I'll talk about him later on. So I have titled this session on the stories of Umar bin Abdul Aziz. And these are not stories actually, these are events from his life, verified and verifiable, because he did not live in a palace, within the walls of a palace. So his life is an open book. And nobody can create a mystique around him. But the man had an enigma, amazing. So we'll talk about that. Renunciation is one of the primary highlights of his life. He was nominated as the Khalifa by Khalifa Suleiman. And I use the term Khalifa because that's what they used for themselves, but they were actually kings in the real sense. Starting with Amir Muawiyah radiallahu anhu up to Suleiman, there were 7 Khalifas, and then Suleiman nominated Umar bin Abdul Aziz, his first cousin, as the Khalifa, and we talked about that. And it was most likely, as historians say, influenced by one of the courtiers, a scholar of influence in the Umayyad court, Raja bin Hayyan al-Kindi. And Raja influenced, did not announce, had it written down and sealed and got the seal of the Khalifa. And the Khalifa passed away, and it was not announced. It was announced after he passed away. And before the announcement, Raja got the allegiance of all the nobles present in the Grand Mosque of the Umayyads in Damascus. He got the allegiance, and then he opened the sealed envelope, and then he announced the name of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, who was the first cousin of the previous Khalifa. The sons, they were either one was in battlefield, the preferred one had died, and then one son at the time of the death of the father was in the battlefield far away, in the Byzantium border. And then the other sons were young. And Suleiman had no choice but to nominate his first cousin. And as soon as Omar bin Abdulaziz heard, uh, he wanted to renounce kingship. He said, no, I can't accept it. This is just a nomination. This is not an election. And it was not decided by a shura, for example. And people pressed him. There was a popular demand, and finally agreed on his own terms that as long as I rule with as per Sunnah, Quran and Sunnah, and then you will follow me. Otherwise, you will not follow me. So Umar bin Abdulaziz was acknowledged Khalifa according to the covenant of late Khalifa Suleiman or King Suleiman. When the covenant of late Suleiman was read out, Umar burst into tears and said, by Allah, verily, I never asked for this authority. And who cries? Who cries when he is announced as the king? He cried, by Allah, verily, I never asked for the authority. The master of the horse brought him the Khalifa's charger, but he refused it and said, bring my mule, bring my mule. And this should remind us of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam entering Makkah as the victor after 22 years of utter persecution and killings by the Quraysh, 22 years. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam entered Makkah as per one narration, riding not on a horse, but on a mule, as per another narration, riding on a camel. So that pride, on a camel. So that pride does not enter his heart. And his head was bowed down, as if touching the back of the camel or the mule, and reciting Astaghfirullah, 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 so that there is no pride in his heart. The Khalifa proceeded towards the imperial palace, and I narrated that story earlier. There were soldiers on either side from the cathedral mosque, the grand mosque to the palace. And as per the account of Imam Suyuti, there were 12,000 soldiers, one division of soldiers. And he looked at the general inquiringly, why all these soldiers? And Omar, it's not that he didn't know. He was courtier under Walid, and then he was a principal advisor under Suleiman, the previous Khalifa. So he knew everything. He was part and parcel of the court. And he was a governor prior to that in Medina. And he was born in the governor's mansion in Egypt. His father was a governor, the brother of King Abdulaziz, Khalifa Abdulaziz. So it's not that he didn't know all of it. And he married the Khalifa's daughter. He looks at the governor, why all these soldiers? And the governor salutes and or whatever they used to do in those days, and said, these are to guard your majesty. And Umar bin Abdulaziz, he refused to stay in the palace firstly, with 12,000 guards and 800 attendants. He lived in a modest rented house with no guards, took a meager salary from the Baitul Mal. And he could have stayed in a part of the palace. I need a small space in the palace, okay? And you don't need attendants for the rest of the palace. But this is what we call taqwa. No, I don't want to live in the palace at all. And this is counter to the spirit of Islam. And that's why I named it the spirit of Islam. What Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam showed was the spirit of Islam. All the austerity and all the precautions he took in terms of staying away from the wealth of dunya, even though he was offered the amount owed in gold, he was offered to him. He was offered also kingship. He refused all of that. So what he showed was the spirit of Islam. And now Umar bin Abdulaziz, after having enjoyed his life for about 37 years, he wants to follow the spirit of Islam before he meets his Lord. And Umar said to his general, if the love of my subjects, and then the general actually said, these are to guard your, protect your majesty. And Umar, Rahmatullah says, if the love of my subjects fails to protect my body, I do not want to protect it with the swords of my soldiers. Send away these soldiers to that part of the empire where their services may be required for keeping peace among my subjects. His intention was to rule with justice. And when people show justice, they have less enemies. And therefore, the first four Khalifas did not have bodyguards. Even though Umar Raziallahu Anhu was assassinated, Usman Raziallahu Anhu did not want to have bodyguards, and so on and so forth. They wanted to rule with justice. And there is a story in which it is said that the Roman emperor sent an assassin to kill Khalifa Umar, whose soldiers, the Muslims, were overrunning territory after territory of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. He sent an assassin, and the assassin went and he found the Khalifa laying down underneath a tree, bare body, without any guards. He was sleeping and was at the mercy of the assassin, but Allah Ta'ala put fear in the heart of Ghassanid. Ghassanid is the name of the person who was commissioned by Heraclius to kill Umar Raziallahu Anhu. O Umar, it is narrated that the assassin said, "O Umar, you rule with justice, and therefore you can sleep. You can sleep without a guard underneath a tree." His sword fell. Umar woke up, and Ghassanid fell on the feet of Umar and embraced Islam. You know, all these kings and rulers and big people of rich people of the world, you know, they have all sorts of guards, and they live in very well guarded, with high gates, well guarded houses, and with boundary walls. And the thought struck me yesterday that these people have earned all their wealth and their power, and they rule with, and they show injustice to people, and so they have enemies all around looking out for them. If somebody is a just man, he will have much less enemies. And the world is complicated. You will have enemies, but you will have much less enemies. More on renunciation and taqwa of Umar bin Abdulaziz. Hakim ibn Umar relates, I was present with Umar when the aide came requesting him to provide for the horses and the stipends for their attendants. Umar Rahmatullah exclaimed, "Send them to the Syrian towns and let anyone buy these horses with the property of the Lord. My gray sheet camel suffices for me." And more on that, Khalifa Abdul Malik had presented a peerless jewel to his Fatima, his daughter and wife of Umar ibn Abdulaziz. I narrated this earlier, but I want to put this before you once again. I mean, everybody wasn't present when I narrated earlier. After he was made Khalifa, Umar said to Fatima, "Choose whether you will give up your jewel to the public treasury, Baitul Mal, or suffer me to separate from you. For verily, I dislike that I and you and the jewel should be in one house." She replied, "Verily, I prefer you to it." He therefore at once deposited the jewel to the public treasury. More on this topic. Abu Umayyah, the slave of Umar, says, and this is one of the most beautiful short stories to me, says, "I went one day to my mistress, the queen, and she gave me a meal of lentils, dal, And I said, everyday lentils. Now, which slave in the world goes to the queen for meal? And what does it tell us? That the queen was the one who was serving, and possibly she also cooked. Somebody must have helped her. She also cooked. So the slave also is fed by the queen. Not that the queen never sees the slave either. Everyday lentils? Okay, what happened? Yes. Everyday lentils. Yeah. And I said, everyday lentils? She replied, amazing, amazing reply. She replied, "O my son, such is the meal of thy master, the commander of the faithful. Such is the meal of thy master." More on this, one day Omar went to his wife and said, "O Fatima, do you have a dirham that I may buy grape with it?" She said, "No, but Amirul Mu'mineen, do you not possess a dirham wherewith to buy grapes?" He replied, "This is easier for me than to labor under monarchs in hell." That means going without grape, plundering Baitul Mal and then enjoying is better for me than to labor under monarchs in hell. Sayyid Ibn Suwaid says, Umar prayed before the people on Friday in the mosque, wearing a shirt patched at the collar in front and behind. And a man said to him, "O commander of the faithful, verily Allah has given unto you, and were you but to clothe yourself properly." Why don't you clothe yourself properly, O Amirul Mu'mineen? And this should remind us of Umar, who was found with 12 patches one day during Jummah. Umar bent down his head, paused for a moment, and then raised his eyes and said, "Moderation is most meritorious in affluence, and pardon most praiseworthy in power." So show humility and moderation when you have affluence, and show pardon when you have power. Justice, fairness, integrity. One day, Omar was seated in his house with some chiefs of the Umayyad clan. And one of the things he did as Khalifa was to do away with the system of fiefdoms and giving ownership over lands to the nobility, so-called nobility belonging to the Umayyad clan, because this dynasty was in power. So he stripped them of that privilege. And he knew when he did that, this is my guess, it's not nowhere written, he knew that his days are numbered, because he was fighting against, or his jihad was against the vested interests. So some of them came to Omar, Khalifa Omar, demanding some important posts under him, but Omar declined. They said, "Why? Have we not kinship with you? Have we not a claim?" The Khalifa exclaimed, "You and the most remote of the Muslims, are but equal in my sight in the matter, save that a long journey's distance keeps that man of the Muslims from me." Everybody is equal. Others cannot come because they are far away from me. You can come, but everybody is equal before me. In other words, he had people in post, but based on meritocracy rather than based on kleptocracy or based on kinship. And more on this topic of justice and fairness and integrity. One day, Omar ordered his servant to heat some water for him. The servant went out and heated a vessel in the public kitchen. Public kitchen. When the Khalifa came to know of it, he ordered the servant to take a dirham's worth of wood and place it in the kitchen. Return what you have taken from what is my salary. Justice, fairness, integrity. He used to light a wax candle for himself and engaged in the work of the Muslims. When engaged in public work, he used a wax candle that was funded by public money. When the public business was finished, he would extinguish it and light his own lamp. The height of integrity and honesty. Justice, fairness, compassion. More on that. Ibn Hayat says, I was talking one night with Umar when the lamp grew dim and near it was an attendant asleep. I said, shall I rouse the servant? He said, no, let him sleep undisturbed. Which king in the world will say that? I said, may I get up then? He answered, it is not polite for a man to exact service from his guest. Then the Khalifa rose, went up to the oil flask, trimmed the lamp and returned and observed, I rose as Umar bin Abdul Aziz and have returned as Umar bin Abdul Aziz. Abdullah Jarrah ibn Abdullah wrote to Umar. Abdul Jarrah ibn Abdullah wrote to Umar, the people of Khurasan are a race whose community is unruly, and verily nothing will mend them but the sword and scourge, meaning punishment, as Putin is exacting on the Ukrainians. May I therefore seek the permission of the commander of the faithful to use them freely. That means punishment and the sword. I mean, sword meaning punishment. The Khalifa replied, thy letter hath reached me, saying that the people of Khurasan are a community that are unruly, and that nothing but the sword and the scourge will mend them. But herein thou art mistaken, for justice and truth will mend them. Therefore spread these among them, and peace be unto thee. That's the end of the letter. And up until now, the stories are from Tariq al-Khulafa by al-Suyuti, aka Jalaluddin, who lived in the 15th century, an Egyptian polymath, scholar, historian, Sufi, and jurist, and from a family of Persian origin. Persians have tremendous contribution to Islamic history. Al-Suyuti's studies included Shafi and Hanafi fiqh, ahadith, tafsir, theology, history, rhetoric, philosophy, philology, arithmetic, timekeeping, miqat, and medicine. He's considered Mujaddid of the 9th century Hijri. He wrote on over 700 subjects. And this is not a guesswork. You know, R. Arvin, a scholar on Islamic history, he carried out a survey around 1995, and in a book published in 1998, we get this figure that Al-Suyuti wrote between 500 and 981 subjects. So the midpoint is 700, roughly. Suyuti is a famous Islamic scholar. Up until that point, are taken from this book by Suyuti. Tariq meaning history, Khulafa, history of the Khalifas. And this is the central theme is the first four Khalifas, but Umar is also included there because he's considered as the fifth Khalifa and the first of the Mujaddids. And the remaining part are from other sources. Queen pleading for her children's Eid dress. Eid festival was near, and Damascus is the capital, and the house of the Khalifa, everybody will come there, meet, all the Amirs and the Sardars will come to meet. And the Queen, Fatima, and she's not de facto she's de facto the queen, but not in terms of her lifestyle. Neither is Omar, who is de facto the king, but not in style. So Fatima to Omar, Eid is near. The children should have 2 new suits of clothes for the occasion. And Omar said, I quite see it, but what can be done? And Fatima said, you know, the sons and daughters of Amirs and Sardars will put on splendid robes and jewels on the occasion. The children of the Khalifa should appear in dresses worthy of their position. And Omar replied, but I have no right to give you what you desire. The daily allowance, and in some other narration, I found that he used to get monthly allowance, whatever the case may be. The daily allowance that I draw for my service as Khalifa is too small to permit new purchase for the children. And Fatima replied, then please give me 1 week's allowance. And another narration, it says 1 month's allowance in advance, and I shall manage to purchase new clothes for the children from the savings thereof. And she is also reported to have said that I will do work with my own hands and sell those and get money, and you can give back to the treasury. And Omar said, but who can say that I shall live another week? And who can guarantee I shall not be deposed by the people before the week expires? And in another narration, it is mentioned that Omar went to the finance minister or the person in charge of the Baitul Mal, the treasury in charge, and told him, I want a week's salary in advance or a month's salary in advance. And the person in charge of Baitul Mal said, please give me in writing that you will live for a week or you will live for a month. And Omar started crying, and he came back to his wife and said, I can't do what you said. Please tell the children there is no new Eid cloth this Eid. Better let us forgo the luxury than run the risk of debt, which we may not be able to repay. And I've given the source. In other words, no deficit financing. That's the spirit of Islam. No debt financing. And then it says in some other source that on the day of Eid, the Amirs and Sardars, they come to pay visit to the Khalifa with their children, and everybody in wonderful dresses, kingly dresses, princely dresses. And Omar in old cloth, and his children, and there were a number of them in old cloth. And as the children of the Amirs and the Sardars advanced, he had tears in his eyes, and he told his children, oh children, I know you are unhappy and you will blame your father that you are in such a position before these wonderfully dressed people. And one of his sons replies, and I quote here, oh father, we are very happy today. Our heads are high that our father has not misused Muslim wealth, has not raided Baitul Mal. He has sacrificed our desires, but has not misused Muslim wealth. Which son in the world will say so if deprived of Eid dress? The Prophet ﷺ, not a tax collector. The tax or jizya on dhimmis. Dhimmis are non-Muslims under Muslim rule, was a large source of income for the treasury. Thousands upon thousands started converting to Islam under Umar and his personal example, his justice, his fairness, his austerity, his renunciation of the world. It became world news that the king has refused to stay in the palace, that he will stay in a modest house, rented house, that he will not ride on kingly horses, charger. Thousands upon thousands started converting to Islam when they saw, and Islam is something to be seen through our personal examples. It's not to be lectured. The Muslims went to different parts of the world, they conquered. And people wanted to know about Islam, but Muslims did not know the language of the people. Who knew the language of the Egyptians, or the Libyans, or the Moroccans, or the Khorasanians, or the Tajikistan people, or the Kazakhstan people, or the people of Afghanistan, or the people of Iran, or the people of Syria? Who knew the language of these people? Now it is mostly Arabic all around, but it was not the case earlier, initially. And the companions and the tabi'is who went to these different territories told the people, see us and you will understand what is Islam. Because that much of language, local language they knew. See us. In other words, as Rasulullah ﷺ exemplified Islam before his companions exemplified Islam, portrayed Islam before others when they went to different territories. Today we have to lecture. Our scholars have to lecture as to what Islam is, because through their personal examples, we see very little of Islam. So when they saw example of Islam, thousands upon thousands converted, tax revenue dried up. Governor Hajjaj bin Yusuf, not during the time of Umar, he was not the governor during the time of Umar. He couldn't be the governor during the time of Umar. But earlier, he imposed a tax on mawalis. New non-Arab Muslims were taxed. They were considered as second-class citizens. They were Muslims, but they were new Muslims. And this was copied elsewhere in the kingdom by different governors. Umar came and he abolished it throughout his kingdom. Governor Hayyan ibn Shari of Egypt complained about effect on state coffers. And this is what Umar responded. The tax must be abolished at once, and all Muslims and new, all Muslims old and new, must be placed on a footing of perfect equality. Allah sent the Prophet ﷺ to instruct and enlighten, and not as tax collector. Queen's beautiful maid. Fatima had a beautiful maid presented by her father, King Abdul Malik. And this maid was so beautiful that Omar, while as governor, requested his wife to present that slave to him, which Fatima refused every time. And that was when he was governor. Fatima declined. After he became Khalifa, Fatima prepared the maid exquisitely and brought her to Omar and said, "O Amirul Mu'mineen, this is my gift to you. This girl is my gift to you." Now Umar is the Khalifa. Umar said, asked the maid, "From where did you come from? Where did you come from?" And the maid replied, "Khalifa Abdul Malik forcibly picked me from Basra." It possibly implies that his men picked this maid from Basra. In other words, she was not captured during war, which is, I mean, you can keep as slave, and not forcibly pick from the street somebody and then bring and sell to somebody else, or bring to the harem of the palace. That is not the spirit of Islam. So she wasn't, in other words, she wasn't, she was not she is not a prisoner of war. Umar called two attendants and asked them to take the maid to her master, sent her to Basra, or asked the attendants to take her to Basra. And then the maid said to Umar, "O Amirul Mu'mineen, what happened to your attraction for me?" She knew that the Khalifa was attracted to her, but Fatima never gave the maid to the Khalifa or to Umar as gift. And so Umar could never enjoy her, in other words. So she said, "What happened to your attraction for me?" The eyes of Umar welled up, tears rolled from his eyes. And then he said, "My attraction has increased, but I sacrifice you for the sake of Allah." And I knew this story for years now. And I used to think that he was showing disinclination towards the world, like renunciation of the palace and kingly rule. He was following Khilafat in the footsteps of the first four Khalifas. So similarly, he renounced this girl, this slave, and didn't want to enjoy her. But then last night it occurred to me that when he found out that this girl was forcibly picked up from Basra, he thought that this was injustice done to her and to her master. So therefore, he wanted to return her. So that is one reason that occurred to me. The other reason, he, by that time, when he became Khalifa, he took leave from his wife, saying that, "You discharge me of my obligations towards you, and if you want, you can divorce me and marry somebody else. But discharge me, if you want to stay with me, discharge me of my physiological obligations towards you." And she did discharge him. So he already had renounced that aspect. And it may be that, as reported, at the time of his death, people heard him say, "Oh Allah, I have not been able to obey your commandments. Please forgive me." And then he uttered kalima, and then he died. What he may have done for which he is giving, he is repentant and giving kafara for what he may have done. Allah knows best. So, but at least this part is clear that he is trying to do justice by returning her to her previous owner. So something wrong was done. He wanted to set that right. And through that process, he wanted to please his Lord. One pair of dress, brother-in-law comes and sees Omar in soiled dress, Purana Kapur. And an emissary is supposed to come, some ambassador from some country. And obviously he's coming to the king. And so he should be well-dressed. So the brother-in-law, who's the son of the previous Khalifa, and Fatima is daughter of a previous Khalifa, comes and tells his sister, "Please get the Amirul Mu'minin properly dressed before the emissary comes." And after some time, the brother comes and sees Omar in the same dress, and he takes the sister aside in another room and asks, "What happened? I asked you to have him dressed properly." And the sister says, what can I do? He has only one pair of dress, only one pair of dress. And he's the king of 40 countries in today's context. His empire extended over about 40 countries. I did the count myself, based on the map of the Umayyad, under Umayyad dynasty around Umar Rahmatullah's time. Only one pair of dress, and he went to meet his Lord with only one dress. Before he was governor, it is stated that about 60 camels were needed to transport his personal effects. 60 camels. Death was poisoned by a slave who was bribed by Umayyad Amirs, who were deprived of the, should I say, bountiful privileges that they enjoyed under the Umayyad Khalifas, kings. So Umar could not have lasted too long. And after 2 years and 4.5 months of Khilafat, they, the deprived people, bribed a slave and poisoned him. And when the doctor found out and said that I am worried about the life of Khalifa, he's poisoned. And Khalifa replied, I'm not sure about the life of the Khalifa. That's something that he said. And the Khalifa replied, can you be sure about the life of somebody who is not poisoned? Can you give any guarantee about that person who's not poisoned? And he refused to take any medicine. He said, I'm ready to meet my Lord. I will not take any medicine. If he wants to take me, I'm ready to meet him. Umar found out which of his slaves, he didn't have a bountiful of them. He had a few of them. He found out, and the person confessed, asked him, how much money you got? And the person said, 1,000 dirhams. He got the money, put it in Baitul Mal, and asked him to leave his house, Umar's house, before somebody kills him. And at the time of his death, and I should mention this part, the time of his death, there are a number of versions of his death, what transpired. And one version says that at the time of his death, people around him heard him welcome, as if he's seeing that others are not seeing, welcoming them. And he said, you are neither human beings, you're neither jinns. Welcome to you. And before he died, he recited verse of the Quran, and he said, most welcome, most blessed is the visit of those who are neither humans or jinns. He recited the Quran, and in this condition he left. And this is something, you know, I am inclined to believe in, regardless of what you might think of this story, because I've seen with my own eyes in 1979, on 29th of November, 1979, in front of me, my oldest uncle died. He had liver cirrhosis, very weakened, couldn't eat properly before he died for months, and actually for weeks. And Thursday, Maghrib Azan was called, and his death time is imminent. We could understand that. We recited kalima around him, and he also uttered kalima, not loudly. I mean, there was no voice because he was so weakened, but he's reciting kalima with us. His lips were moving. We could see that. And just a few minutes before his death, his eyeballs started moving around. His eyeballs started moving around very speedily. I mean, a normal person cannot do that. Very speedily. And he was looking at the ceiling. He was looking at the ceiling, and he pointed his finger towards the ceiling. He pointed his finger like this, as I'm showing, towards the ceiling. And he smiled. And he smiled at least 3 times. Firstly, we could understand he's saying something. And secondly, I remember the hadith of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when a good man dies, angels in beautiful form, Azrail alayhi salam and 500 angels in beautiful form, they come before the person, showing images of paradise, and the person is pleased to see those images, and the person's soul wants to get out of his body. Who wants to stay in the world if he knows that he's about to enter paradise? So I saw these expressions of a dead man, of a dying person, And so Omar doing it, no, after all these sacrifices that he and renunciation that he has done, and justice that he has shown, and so much of service that he has given to Islam. I mean, he will get such treatment from the angels, is no surprise. I'll not talk about the first point, and this is from a reflection from previous week. And I mentioned this also, that he waged a jihad of a different kind, and that was to purify the muashara, the branches of the government from vested interests, and used it to do good for common Muslims, and do so through sheer personal example. For him, Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, this was 30 plus 56 years when he became Khalifa, 56 years after Muawiyah came to power. So 56, and before that, 30 years of Khulafai Rashidun. So that is 86 years passed by that Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam had left the world. So he was a distant example for him. And then I mentioned, and this is for those who were not present last week, his lifestyle was the exact opposite of what Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam preferred. And that is before he became a Khalifa. And 2 years and 4.5 months before he left to meet his creator, he changed to conform to the lifestyle of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He showed that one can change oneself to conform to the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam under any circumstance. Given that the timing of death is uncertain, a wise person will not delay in surrendering completely to the Creator, which is what Islam is, surrender. And the way to surrender is conforming to the lifestyle of the model Allah sent for us. It won't take any more time. I have some words on and rather than do it next week, I just want to finish it off. Please give me extra, just 5 minutes. We don't have to separate ourselves from our wives. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did not do that. And as I mentioned, Umar Rahmatul Alayhi, by separating himself from his wife, was possibly giving some kafara. He must have felt he had a great worldly life when the world was at his feet and was trying to drown him, as well as Shaitan trying to overpower him. He renounced the world. Because when one renounces the world, with what will Shaitan try to entice a person? For us, at some point, we have to say enough is enough. Enough is enough. We go from one career to another career, one project to another project, and this process ends with death. Dunya does not leave us. Shaitan is behind us always, and nafs always tries to drive us. They don't leave us. There never comes a time when we can have enough of dunya and say enough is enough. And there never comes a time when we have enjoyed dunya and start communion with Allah Ta'ala. That time hardly ever comes. A time for communion with Allah Ta'ala. Umar too, when he became Khalifa, and he knew that on the way he is ruling, he cannot last too long. So he made a deal with his wife, spent his nights on the Jainamas, and before that with the scholars, Talim, halqa of Talim with the scholars, and then Jainamas, spending whole night on the Jainamas, and any sleep, he would do that on the Jainamas, crying before the Almighty, and during the daytime, ruling as a just Khalifa with utmost austerity. The example of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and Khulafai Rashidin. So these are the weapons he used, surrounding himself with scholars and ruling with justice and spending nights on the Jainamas, Sufra. And as Khalifa, he removed many innovations, bidat, and established or re-established many sunnah. First and foremost, the sunnah of ruling in the way of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Khulafai Rashidin. And that should remind us of Heraclius asking his generals when the Muslims conquered territory after territory. And I will leave with this quote from his generals. Heraclius actually asked them, why are you losing in battle after battle? You are great generals, and we have a great army. The Roman generals bent their heads in shame and kept silent. At last, one old Roman warrior broke the silence and said, the secret of the Arab conquest lies in their character, and the secret of Umar lies in his character. I again read, they devote a part of the night in prayer to Allah, to God. They actually said God. They fast at daytime, or whatever they may have said. They fast at daytime when necessary. They molest none. Perfect equality reigns among them. Hence, they are so brave and energetic in action, so unshakable in their determination. And we are proud. We are addicted to many a vice. We break our promises. We molest the weak. Hence, we lack in patience and courage. And actually, this Roman warrior was not just mentioning his people. He's mentioning later Muslims. And what did he say? We are proud. We are addicted to many a vice. We break our promises. We molest the weak. Hence, we lack in patience and courage. May Allah Ta'ala give us understanding. Allahumma ameen. We pray that all of us, amongst us, who are sick, or suffering in different ways, may Allah Ta'ala grant shifa and help Farooq Amin, Amir Hussain, Mrs. Maskura Ayub, Captain Shamsuzaman, Abul Barkat, Mrs. Mahfuz Reza, Mahfuz from 6th batch, Noor Alam Siddiqui, 4th batch, Abdul Rauf, 13th batch, Romel, 17th batch, Saif's father-in-law, Saif from 19th batch, Jahangir Abdullah from 24th batch, wife of Imroz, Imroz from 21st batch, Amirul Faisal from 19th batch. After second stroke, suffering for 5-6 years, late Colonel Aftab's wife, Aftab from 14th batch, and his wife suffering from cancer. Major Mahbub suffering from post-COVID complications. Farooq, again back to Delhi for further treatment from 15th batch. Abir's father, Mr. Muhammad Ali Reza, Abir from 28th batch. Zakaria's father, who is undergoing constant dialysis thrice a week. Zakaria from 47th batch. I don't know how General Razakul Haider is, and anybody else in your mind, I will include in the prayers. May Allah Ta'ala give Jannatul Firdaus to all our near and dear ones who are in the grave under the care of the Almighty. Allahumma ameen, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, jazallahu anna Muhammadan sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. La ilaha illallahul halimul kareem, subhanallahi rabbil arshil azim, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin, asaluka mujibati rahmatika, wa zaima magfiratika, wa ghanimata min kulli birri, wa salamata min kulli ithm, la tadalana zamban illa ghafartahu, wa la hamman illa farajtahu, wa la marizan illa شفايته ولا دينا إلا كزيته ولا مجاهدا إلا نصرته ولا مظلوما إلا نصرته ولا مسلما إلا رحمته ولا حاجة هي لك رضا إلا كزيتها يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم أسألك من خير ما سألك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذك منه نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم اغفر لي ولوالدنا وجميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك مجيب الدعوات برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وقنا عذاب الموت وقنا عذاب القبر وقنا عذاب الحشر وقنا عذاب الميزان وقنا عذاب الصراط وقنا عذاب المسيح الدجال. ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما. ربي اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي ربنا تقبل دعاء. والله তুমি আমাদেরকে যে তৌফিক দিয়েছো আমরা তার যোগ্য না আল্লাহ, তোমার সামনে আমরা দাঁড়াবার যোগ্য না, হাত উঠাবার যোগ্য না, তোমার ইবাদতের যোগ্য না, তোমার নাম উচ্চারণ করার যোগ্য না আমরা আল্লাহ। তারপরেও তুমি আমাদের তৌফিক দিয়েছো আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ, কিছু ইবাদত করার আল্লাহ টুটা ফাটা যাই হোক আল্লাহ, সেটা যাতে প্রতিটা দিন আরো সুন্দরভাবে করতে পারি, আরো ইমানের সাথে, আরো তাকওয়ার সাথে আল্লাহ। তুমি আমাদের তৌফিক বাড়িয়ে দাও, প্রত্যেকটা দিন এলেমের সাথে জুড়ে রেখো আল্লাহ। তোমাকে যাতে জানতে পারি, চিনতে পারি, মানতে পারি, তোমার নবীকে জানতে পারি এবং সুন্নতকে অনুসরণ করতে পারি আল্লাহ প্রতিটা দিন আল্লাহ, যাতে করে আমাদের ইমান বাড়তেই থাকে, আমাদের ইমান সুন্দর হতেই থাকে আল্লাহ, যাতে করে আমরা তোমার হুকুম পুরাপুরি তামিল করার যোগ্য হই আল্লাহ। তোমার বান্দাদের প্রতি আমাদের দায়িত্ব পুরোপুরি ভাবে আমরা যাতে আমরা তামিল করতে পারি আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ, তুমি আমাদের কবুল করো আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ, তুমি আমাদের কবুল করো, আমাদের জীবনটা যাতে ধ্বংস হয়ে না যায় দুনিয়ার পিছনে ছুটে, নফসের তাড়নার মধ্যে পড়ে, শয়তানের ধোকার মধ্যে পড়ে, দুনিয়ার চাকচিক্যের মধ্যে পড়ে, মানুষের কুমন্ত্রণার মধ্যে পড়ে আমরা যাতে ধ্বংস হয়ে না যাই। প্রতিটা মুহূর্তে আমাদেরকে রক্ষা করো আল্লাহ। হাত ধরে কবর পর্যন্ত নিয়ে যেও আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ, যখন তুমি আমাদের উপর সন্তুষ্ট হও আল্লাহ, তখন আমাদেরকে নিয়ে যেও আল্লাহ। পৃথিবী থেকে কলেমা সহ শয়তানের শেষ চেষ্টা ব্যর্থ করে দিয়ে যাতে করে আমরা তোমার সর্বোত্তম ব্যবহার পেতে পারি আখিরাতের প্রত্যেকটা ঘাটিতে আল্লাহ। এবং যা কিছু পাঠ করার তৌফিক দিয়েছো আল্লাহ, ও আল্লাহ তুমি তার সওয়াব রাসূল করিম সাল্লাল্লাহু আলাইহি সাল্লামের কাছে পৌঁছে দিও আল্লাহ, এবং তার সওয়াব পৌঁছে দিও আমাদের আপনজন, প্রিয়জন, নিকটজন যারা কবরে শায়িত আল্লাহ তাদের কাছে পৌঁছে দিও আল্লাহ। আমাদের আত্মীয় স্বজন, আমাদের প্রিয়জন, আপনজন, নিকটজন, বন্ধু বান্ধব, শিক্ষক শিক্ষয়িত্রী, পাড়া প্রতিবেশী আল্লাহ, ও আল্লাহ আমাদের কলেজের সাথে জড়িত যারা কবরে শায়িত তথা সমস্ত মুসলমানের কাছে পৌঁছে দিও আল্লাহ। তাদের কবরের আযাব মাফ করে দিও আল্লাহ, কবরকে প্রশস্ত করে দিও আল্লাহ, কবরকে নূর দিয়ে পরিপূর্ণ করে দিও আল্লাহ, কবরকে জান্নাতুল ফেরদৌসের বাগান বানিয়ে দিও আল্লাহ, এবং আমাদের সাথে অনুরূপ ব্যবহার করো আল্লাহ। প্রতিটা দিন দরজা উঁচু করে দিও আল্লাহ তাদেরকে, এবং আমাদেরকে কিয়ামতের দিন তোমার আরশের নিচে ছায়া দিও আল্লাহ। আমাদের হিসাব সহজ করে দিও আল্লাহ, ডান হাতে আমলনামা দিও আল্লাহ, আমাদেরকে নিশ্চিন্ত মনে রেখো আল্লাহ তাদেরকে এবং আমাদেরকে চোখের পলকে পুলসিরাত পার করিয়ে দিও আল্লাহ, এবং বিনা হিসাবে জান্নাতুল ফেরদৌসে দাখিল করো যাতে আমরা আবার সবাই একত্রিত বাস করতে পারি আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ তুমি আমাদের কবুল করে নাও আল্লাহ, প্রত্যেকটা কাজ, প্রত্যেকটা আমল তোমার সন্তুষ্টির জন্য যাতে করতে পারি, কেবলমাত্র তোমার সন্তুষ্টি অন্তরে, আর কোনো কোনো নিয়ত যাতে না থাকে আল্লাহ। একমাত্র তোমার সন্তুষ্টি চাই আল্লাহ, তোমার ভালোবাসা সহ যাতে তোমার আমল করতে, তোমার হুকুম তামিল করতে পারি আল্লাহ। এবং তোমার বান্দাদের প্রতি আমরা যা কিছু অন্যায়, অত্যাচার, অনাচার, মিথ্যাচার, গীবত করেছি আল্লাহ, তা তুমি তাদেরকে খুশি করে দিও যাতে তারা আমাদেরকে মাফ করে দেয় আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ, ও আল্লাহ তোমার শান মতো চাওয়ার ক্ষমতা আমার নাই আল্লাহ, তুমি তোমার শান মতো দান করো আল্লাহ। তোমার শান মতো হেফাজত চাওয়ার ক্ষমতা নাই আল্লাহ, তুমি তোমার শান মতো আমাদেরকে হেফাজত করো আল্লাহ। আমরা তোমার কাছে অনেক আশা নিয়ে হাত উঠিয়েছি আল্লাহ, তুমি ছাড়া আর কার কাছে হাত উঠাবো আল্লাহ? তুমি ছাড়া আমাদের প্রয়োজন কে মিটাতে পারে আল্লাহ? তুমি ছাড়া আর কে দাতা আল্লাহ? একমাত্র দাতা তুমি আল্লাহ, একেলা বাদশাহ আল্লাহ, একেলা বাদশাহ আল্লাহ। তার কাছে হাত উঠিয়েছি, আমাদের কিসের চিন্তা আল্লাহ? তুমি আমাদের সব আমাদের চাওয়া পাওয়া, আমাদের নেক হাজত পুরা করে দিও আল্লাহ। যে কোনো কিছু পৃথিবীর জন্য ক্ষতিকর হলে তার বদলা তুমি আখেরাতে দিও আল্লাহ। আমাদের সমস্ত বিপদ আপদ পেরেশানি দূর করে দিও আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ আমরা কত বিভিন্ন জন বিভিন্ন বিপদ আপদের কারণে হাত উঠিয়েছি আল্লাহ। তুমি আমাদের সমস্ত এবং আমাদের আত্মীয় স্বজনের এবং আমাদের সন্তান সন্ততির এবং আমাদের বন্ধু বান্ধবের বিপদ আপদ এবং আমাদের পাড়া প্রতিবেশের বিপদ আপদ, আমাদের দেশবাসীর বিপদ আপদ, আমাদের বিশ্ববাসীর বিপদ আপদ নিমেষের মধ্যে চোখের পলকে দূর করে দিতে পারবো আল্লাহ। মুসলমান কত জায়গায় কত কষ্টের মধ্যে আছে আল্লাহ, পদদলিত, নির্যাতিত, নিপীড়িত আল্লাহ, নিষ্পেষিত আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ মানুষ মুসলমান হোক অমুসলমান হোক কষ্টের মধ্যে আছে আল্লাহ, তাদের সবার জন্য আমরা দোয়া করি আল্লাহ। তুমি সবাইকে হেদায়েত দিও আল্লাহ, সমস্ত মুসলমানকে মাগফিরাত করো আল্লাহ, রহমত করো, হেফাজত করো আল্লাহ। ও আল্লাহ হেদায়েত করো আল্লাহ, আমাদের বংশধরকে এবং মুসলমানের বংশধরকে তুমি হেদায়েত করো, হেফাজত করো, রক্ষা করো আল্লাহ। সমস্ত মানুষকে হেদায়েত করে দিয়ে তাদের বংশধরদেরকে হেফাজত করো, রক্ষা করো আল্লাহ। অন্নহারা, বস্ত্রহারা, গৃহহারা, দিশাহারা, যেই ধরনের বিপদের মধ্যে থাক আল্লাহ, কন্যাদায়গ্রস্ত, রোগগ্রস্ত, ঋণগ্রস্ত, অভাবগ্রস্ত, সবাইকে জুলুমগ্রস্ত আল্লাহ, তুমি সবাইকে 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 তাদের প্রয়োজন মিটিয়ে দিয়ে আল্লাহ, তাদের বিপদ আপদ দূর করে দিয়ে আল্লাহ, তুমি সুন্দর জীবন যাপন করার তৌফিক দান করো আল্লাহ। হায়াতুন তাইয়্যিবা দান করো আল্লাহ। আল্লাহুম্মা আসআলুকা اللهم اسالك العافيه، اللهم اسالك العافيه، اللهم اسالك العافيه، اللهم ربي اني مساني الضر وانت ارحم الراحمين، ربي انزلني منزلا مباركا وانت خير المنزلين، ربي ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. لا اله الا انت سبحانك اني كنت من الظالمين، لا اله الا انت سبحانك اني كنا من الظالمين. Allahumma innaka afuwwun kareemun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anna rabbana zalamna anfusana wa illam taghfir lana wa tarhamna lanakunanna minal khasirin rabbana la tuzigh qulubana ba'da idh hadaytana wa hab lana min ladunka rahmatan innaka antal wahhab ya qaziyul hajat ya rafiyad darajat ya halalal mushkilat ya mujibud da'wat bi rahmatika nastaghis ya awwalal awwalin ya akhirul akhirin ya akramal akramin या रहमान राहिमीन या राहिमल मसाकीन या जिल कुव्वतल मतीन ও আল্লাহ তুমি আমাদের ঝুলি ভরে দিও আল্লাহ ও আল্লাহ তুমি আমাদেরকে খালি হাতে ফিরিও না আল্লাহ ও আল্লাহ আমাদের নেক হাজত পুরা করে দিও আল্লাহ সুবহান রাব্বিকা রাব্বিল ইজ্জাতি আম্মা ইয়াসিফুন ওয়া সালামুন আলাল মুরসালিন ওয়ালহামদুলিল্লাহি রাব্বিল আলামিন ওয়া হাক্কা লা ইলাহা ইল্লাল্লাহ মুহাম্মাদুর রাসূলুল্লাহ সাল্লাল্লাহু আলাইহি ওয়াসাল্লাম আমিন ইয়া রাব্বিল আলামিন আমিন ইয়া রাব্বিল আলামিন আমিন ইয়া রাব্বিল আলামিন سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وحق لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم আসসালামু আলাইকুম ওয়া রাহমাতুল্লাহি ওয়া বারাকাতুহু ইনশাআল্লাহ আমরা সামনের রবিবারে আবার মিলিত হব একই সময়